Hi, I'm Jason Martin, Environmental Coordinator for the City of Greenbelt, and this warm weather means that ticks will be out and about here very soon, and I would like to just talk with you a little bit about how you can protect yourself, your children, and everyone else in your family from ticks and Lyme disease this summer. So ticks are arachnids. They're not insects. They have 8 legs instead of 6, so they're more closely related to things like spiders and mites and things like that. They're ectoparasites, which means that they are parasites that are living and doing their thing on the outside of the body, not inside the body, and they do feast on blood. They have a sucking mouth part where they pierce your skin, and they stay attached anywhere from 24 to 72 hours, and they feed on your blood. They've been around for a very long time. They evolved anywhere from 146 million years ago to 60 million years ago. And there are many species all around the world, at current estimates, anywhere 900 to 1,000 species described. They prefer warm, humid climates. That's due to the fact that they don't have any thermoregulatory systems because they are not mammals. They don't have the same metabolisms and things that we do, so they can't control their body temperatures. And they also don't take in water and have sweating capabilities and things like we do. And so insects and arachnids and other organisms like that, they have very passive respiratory systems where there's a lot of water loss. So they need humid climates not to dehydrate too fast, and they need warm climates to be able to survive. So the Maryland summers is a perfect climate for ticks. Different species have a range of hosts. Some are specialized, some are more general, and these include mammals such as ourselves and your dogs and deer and mice, which we'll cover later. But some of them even specialize in birds and reptiles and even amphibians. And in Maryland, we only have 5 species of tick that are found, and only 4 of them are very common. There's 1 species that you're not going to find and have to worry about, and only 1 will transmit Lyme disease, and that's the deer tick, and we'll talk about that more here in a little bit. So the different tick species, you have the American dog tick, the black-legged or deer tick, the brown dog tick, and the Lone Star tick. Now, like I said, only the deer tick will transmit Lyme disease, and so that's the only one you really have to be worried about, but there are many other diseases that ticks can spread, and each species of tick kind of has its own flavor of diseases and parasites and things that come along with it. But generally, if you get bit by a tick, you're probably going to be okay, with the exception of the transmission of Lyme disease in this area. So these are just some pictures of close-up electron microscope scans of what ticks look like. I just thought that they were really neat and wanted to share them with you. But you can see that they have 8 legs, 4 on either side. They have a very flat, kind of saucer, oval-shaped body. And then they have, you can see there, like a straw for a mouth, and that's the sucking mouth part. And so that'll pierce your skin, and then they'll suck blood from the capillaries. Those are the very small blood cells just underneath the skin. This is a picture of a tick that is actually attached and feeding. So like I said, the only tick that you have to really worry about with Lyme disease is the deer tick, and ticks all look generally the same. And so to be able to tell the deer tick from the rest is that the deer tick does not have any distinctive markings. As you can see, the males and the females of these different species here, which is the dog tick, the Lone Star tick, and the deer tick, the males and females are very distinct from one another, with the exception of the deer tick, where they're very similar. The dog tick has almost like a marbled look to it. So there's this integration of the dark blacks and browns and the white. And of course the Lone Star tick just has a nice solid white spot on its back, and the deer tick doesn't have any distinctive markings. So if you find a tick on you and it does not have any distinctive markings, no banding on the legs, no white spot on the back, no marbling on the back, then it's probably a deer tick. And what you really have to be worried about with the transmission of Lyme disease is the nymphs. And so these are the, you can think of them essentially the baby ticks. Ticks do not go through what's called complete metamorphosis like some insects, because they're not insects. And so think of like a caterpillar that's born, or excuse me, a butterfly that's born from an egg, goes to a caterpillar, goes to a chrysalis, and then goes and becomes a butterfly. And so it looks very different as, let's say, a baby insect to an adult insect. Ticks are different. They come out of the egg looking just like miniature adults, and then as they grow, they molt, so they shed their exoskeleton, and then they just become a little bit bigger until they reach their adult size. Nymph ticks are the #1 transmitter of Lyme disease, not necessarily the adult ticks, and that's simply because they're so small that they're very hard to see, and so they stay attached longer because people don't see them when they're doing their tick checks. They're incredibly small, as you can see from this picture here. I would say that might even be second instar stage because they are a little bit bigger. I've seen them much smaller than this. But even at that stage, before they become a full-fledged adult, they're very small, and they can find their way into warm, wet creases of your body, and you would never even know that they were there. And they could feed all day long for 2 or 3 days, transmit Lyme disease, and then fall off and go about their merry way, and you would have never known that they were there, because when a tick bites you, there is no pain. You don't even feel it, and you can barely feel an adult crawling on you, and you're definitely not going to feel a nymph or a baby tick crawling on you. So I'm going to talk about Lyme disease. What is Lyme disease? Lyme disease is a fairly new disease to this country. It was first described in the United States in 1977, and the bacteria that caused the disease wasn't discovered and identified until the 1980s. The bacteria that causes Lyme disease is in the classification of a spirochete, which I'll show you a picture of what it looks like later. This is a classification of bacteria that looks almost like a spring. It looks like a spiral, so spirochete. They're spread through infected ticks, especially the deer tick, as I said before. And symptoms include fever, headache, skin rash, fatigue. And if you catch it early enough, Lyme disease is very treatable with antibiotics. But if it goes untreated long enough, it can make its way into the heart and nervous system and can cause a lot of problems. And even joints. This right here is a classic bullseye that happens when you get bit by a tick and you don't find it in time, and Lyme disease is transmitted. At the bite site, which is in the center of this bullseye, this rash will occur. It doesn't occur in everybody, but it does occur in enough people that this is a very good warning sign that Lyme disease has been transmitted to you. So if you see this on yourself or you see this on your children, you need to go to the doctor as soon as possible and get treated with antibiotics. This is a picture of the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, and as you can see, it has a spiral shape to it. And this is one next to, I believe, some red blood cells. So where does Lyme disease occur on this map? Everywhere where Lyme disease has been documented is in blue. And so as you can see, Maryland is completely covered. So anywhere in the state of Maryland, a lot of the mid-Atlantic up in the Northeast are all hot spots for Lyme disease. So even in your backyard, there's going to be ticks there. And in parks and any public spaces where you have grass or forested areas, you're going to have ticks, which means there's the possibility of Lyme disease. So how do you get Lyme disease? As I said before, young ticks or nymphs are the most likely culprits, but even adult ticks can transmit Lyme disease. It's just that adult ticks are easier to see, and so they usually get removed before Lyme disease transmission can happen. Nymphs get it from their first host. So the deer tick has 2 or 3 hosts that it will go through before it completes its life cycle. And the first host is usually rodents, or what some people will refer to as the white-footed deer mouse, but there are also other rodents that carry the Lyme disease bacterium that the nymphs can get to, and they also overwinter on those rodents in their dens so they don't freeze to death, and that's where they pick up Lyme disease. And so when the rodents come out for the springtime, the nymphs fall off and they go search for another host, and if a human happens to come by and they latch on and start feeding, they'll transmit that Lyme disease to the human. Like I said, it can take anywhere from 24, 36, 48 hours for the disease to transmit. So if you go out for a day in the woods hiking, or you're at a park, or even just doing some gardening or landscaping in your yard, before you go and take a shower for that day, make sure you take a nice hot soapy shower and check yourself over for ticks. It's just that simple. Even if they're already feeding, if you catch them within 24 hours and remove them, the likelihood of you getting Lyme disease is so low that you probably won't have to worry about it. But keep an eye on the spot if they are attached and feeding, and make sure that that bullseye rash does not appear. And if you do see a bullseye rash, you need to go see a doctor. And Lyme disease is not spread human to human. You can only get it by getting bit by a tick. This diagram shows the life cycle of your common deer tick you're going to find around here. So an adult lays eggs, the nymphs hatch from those eggs, they go find their first host, which is usually some kind of a rodent. It overwinters with that host and then detaches from that host and can either go to another host, which can be another rodent, or it can be a human. Then that nymph goes through multiple instar stages, which means that it grows and molts and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then as an adult, they can attach, of course, onto humans or your dog or your pets and come inside your house and then attach to you. But the adults will generally attach to white-tailed deer, which is why they're called a deer tick. The males and females will mate, and then the females will overwinter on the deer and then lay eggs, and the cycle continues. This diagram shows basically the life cycle throughout the year. And so as you can see, the blue is the nymphs, and they're at their peak activity in August and September, all the way through October. So the late summer, very early fall is when you're going to have the highest probability of running into nymphs. But remember that even the adults in the dead of summer can still transmit Lyme disease. So just because we're not in the peak season right now doesn't mean that you should be lax about it. You should definitely be starting to do your tick checks every day, starting right now, because the weather is getting warm enough and it's wet enough for ticks to start becoming active. So how do you prevent Lyme disease? Well, the easiest way is to avoid tick-infested areas, but that's not always possible because here, especially in Greenbelt, we all love our public green spaces and being in the outdoors. You can use repellent. Make sure that the repellent specifically says that it repels ticks or kills ticks on contact, and use as directed. Some are only supposed to be used on clothing and not skin, and so you don't want to put repellent on your skin that's not supposed to be there. You can cause some problems. Also perform daily tick checks. Like I said, if you come in at the end of the day and just give yourself a good once over and take a nice hot soapy shower, you're generally going to be okay. And then if you think that your clothes might have ticks on them because you've been out in the woods or out in the yard, just throw them in the dryer on high heat for about 10 minutes, and that will kill any ticks that might find their way into your clothing. There are commercial products and then homemade projects that you can do to make tick tubes, and I'll explain what tick tubes are right now. So tick tubes are tubes. They can be plastic tubes or cardboard tubes that have cotton or some kind of other absorbent material that has been treated with permethrin, which is an insecticide that kills ticks. And you put these tubes with this permethrin treated cotton or other fabric filling out in your yard, and the idea is that the rodents, i.e. mice, who have these nymphs on them for overwintering will take that cotton and make bedding out of it for their winter dens. They'll lay on this cotton, and the ticks will come in contact with the permethrin, and they'll be killed. So that way you reduce the number of ticks that are making it to the next year in a nymph stage that are feeding on these rodents that carry the Lyme disease. They've been shown to be pretty effective at reducing tick populations in areas that they are used. But the research does not show that it has any effectiveness in reducing the chance of contracting Lyme disease. And one of the reasons is because these tick tubes have to be used correctly, and everybody in an area has to use them. And you have to use a lot of them in a given area to be effective, and you have to refresh them with fresh tubes and cotton throughout the year. And so if you use them in your yard and your neighbor doesn't, or even if a whole neighborhood uses them, but not everybody is keeping on schedule with changing out the cotton and retreating with permethrin, they're not going to be effective. So you need more than one tube. The tubes need to be replaced several times throughout the year. And the concentrations can be as high as 6 tubes per 1/8 acre or 24 tubes per half acre, and all the way up to 96 tubes for 2 acres. And you don't want any more than about 10 yards in between each tube. So it takes a lot of work, and if you're buying commercial tubes, a money investment to make this product work effectively. This is a picture of a commercial variety of tick tube that you can buy online. You can also make them yourselves. You can take just a cardboard tube or a plastic tube and stuff it with cotton balls or dryer lint that has been treated with permethrin. And permethrin is available hardware stores and online. And here's a diagram of how it works. The rodent takes the permethrin treated cotton, makes a bed out of it, sleeps on it, and any ticks that are on the rodent come in contact with that permethrin, and then they are killed, thus reducing the tick population and also the likelihood of you running into a tick that has Lyme disease. So these are an option, but the best thing to do is to just do your daily tick checks. It does not take very much time. It takes less than a minute. And if you have young children, make sure you check them, and then just throw your clothes in hot wash or in the dryer for about 10 minutes on high heat if you think that you've come in contact with ticks, and you can greatly reduce your chance of getting Lyme disease. Again, if you find a tick that's attached to you in feeding, keep an eye on the area, and if you get the rash, the classic bullseye rash, or any rash at all, just play it safe and go see your doctor, and a simple round of antibiotics can treat Lyme disease if it's caught early. The longer it stays in the system, the harder it is to treat. But other than that, have a safe summer and be tick smart. Thank you.